Now, it is true that there is and can be a lot more to a story than the plot. And really, in a way, the plot is just, it can be the starting point. And if you use your story as a platform for great humor or new insight or some creative element that you have come up with that does not show up in storytelling very often and makes your stories unique. Back to plot, though. Plot is an amazing way of captivating your readers. I want you to ask yourself, what is plot exactly? To say that plot is what happens in the story and where the story goes through a line of events may not necessarily be true, because if you're adding humor, there could be things that happen in the story that happen despite what is going on with the plot and still contribute to a great story. What you decide that plot is and how you choose to look at your story in terms of what its plot is a great tool you can use in editing your story and making it better. I know that there are a lot of techniques out there about following the arc of the story and the hero's journey and the things that are supposed to happen in a story and the stages that it is supposed to go through. And you know, these are effective techniques, but I think that if you create a story that is a line of cause and effect, where the cause and the event after event of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, that logically leads from point A to point B, can be just as effective as the more formulaic, you create the hero, create the villain, return to the village with the reward, that sort of thing. You can come up with stories that resemble that not at all, and in terms of plot are still just as captivating, just as effective. So one way that we can use writing tools is to choose the different ways we look at plot, and what I want to present to you is looking at your plot in terms of the powers that be. So we are not looking at plot in terms of that line of consecutive cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect from beginning to end. We are going to look at it in terms of a group of all the powers that are in play in the story and how they push and pull at each other and how they play out from the beginning to the end. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's look at the story of the tortoise and the hare. You have the rabbit and the turtle that they compete. They want to find out who can win the race, because the rabbit's always making fun of the turtle for being so slow, and they start out on the race, they go, the tortoise is hopelessly slow, and the rabbit immediately runs pretty close to the finish line, but then runs back and talks to some of the other animals in the forest while the tortoise is still running the race, and the rabbit takes a nap and goes and eats a snack and loses track of time and realizes just too late that the tortoise has just crossed the finish line. So let's break it into the powers that be and take a close look at the story this way. So basically what I have here is you have the powers that are working in the story. On the rabbit side, you have the rabbit's ego, the fact, what else did I write here? The rabbit is very fast, and the turtle is, another element is that the turtle is slow, but the turtle is practically tunnel vision. Once the turtle is going to do something, that's all the turtle sees, and the turtle doesn't see anything else. And another power that is acting in the story, or another factor, is the environment of the race. So the story takes place, you can have a story where there are different, this environment, okay, the characters are going to run the race, and so that is the environment that the story is working in, and that contributes to the way the different powers play out and which ones win over in the end. Now, by thinking about the story very clearly in these terms, you have a lot more room to work out what are the dynamics of how your story plays out. You can start to ask yourself, well, how might they work out in different ways, and think a little bit more flexibly about how exactly your story moves along. Now, most of the stories out there involve some kind of conflict, some kind of problem that needs to be solved, some kind of struggle, some kind of thing that needs resolving. But pointless conflict has a negative effect on the reader. If you're going to have any kind of struggle, it needs to be for a reason. It's those reasons that compel the reader. And so what you want to do is when you're looking at the different power elements in your story, many of those can be like a certain need, or you can have one character who wants to take over a company, and so that need is one of the factors that is playing in your story. So when you're when you're trying to get a clear picture about the powers that be in your story, it could be anything that contributes, that is an active factor in this formula, that is the struggle of how your story is going to play out. So if you have a bridge that at one point is blown up so that the character can't return after going over the bridge is one of the factors in the story. And if you have a character who has some kind of handicap, that handicap is a factor in the story. Now, as an exercise, you can go to one of your favorite movies or stories and sit down with a pad of paper and pen and write down in each its own little bubble the different factors. And to decide whether something is a factor in your story or not, ask yourself, does it affect the outcome of the story? What I'm describing here is the inner logic of a story that makes it captivating, that makes it compelling to the reader. Most stories have the good guy and the bad guy, but the villain, no real human being is a villain just for the sake of being a villain. They have needs, they have motivations, and when you're working with all the characters in your story, ask yourself, what are their motivations, their prejudices, their fears, their ways of dealing with others that are contributing factors to the story that help decide how exactly your story is going to play out. So let's look at this in a practical way, and how do we look at this in terms of creating a new story? So you have a story idea and you want to build a plot around it, and you know that there's a part of a story that you still need the villain for this one part. Ask yourself, what are their motivations? What are they there for? What is it that they need from the hero, or that they need that the hero is interfering with, or that they are, it could be that they're threatened that the hero is there, or it could be that they're trying to protect something. What are their reasons for being there? And write it down and make it very clear. write down their motivation on a post-it note and stick it up near your computer. Now, normally when we write a story, we think of, okay, you have hero, villain, and what they do and how, and what happens till eventually, you know, you get to the conclusion of the story. But let's look at it in terms of, we're looking more at we're breaking it down into the different power elements. So let's look at how the different motivations in the story play out. Let's look at how the different needs of the different characters in the story play out. Let's look at how the different handicaps of each character in the story play out. Look at your own life, or look at current events, or start to develop a keen eye for these different power struggles that take place in real life and in fiction. What makes a story exciting is the strategy involved, and one of the best ways to really work out a great strategy is to become very clear about what the different factors in the story are. Become a collector of different scenarios of this kind. Let's look at the scenario of the all-powerful empire versus the small rebel group. Now, in this power struggle, you have two opposing forces. On the empire side, you have massive amounts of power, a need to control in a totalitarian fashion. You know, this is a group that will not be happy unless they have total control and they feel their needs are control. Otherwise, they feel like there could be an opportunity for takeover and corruption of their empire. And on the other hand, you have a small rebel group, and they hardly have any power. They have hardly any weapons, and yet they have a much better knowledge of that very local part of the world that they live on. So each of these groups have their advantages. One is mass weapons, and disadvantages, you know, or on the rebel side, it is intimate knowledge of that particular location, and their disadvantages. The empire, always kind of a stranger no matter where they are, never really at home, even though they control practically everywhere. Disadvantages of the rebel, of course, they only have 3 guns, and one of them is broken right now. So basically, now looking at this in its most essential power struggle, you can take this scenario and you could apply it to a completely different story. Let's say that you have a local bakery that is being taken over by a national chain of bakeries that is totally wiping out all independent bakeries across the country. And so, you know, the story starts at the beginning of the takeover. So the owner hands the ownership of the building over to, you know, a corporate official, who then goes in and says, okay, I'm your new boss. I may let you continue to work here, maybe not. We'll see how the day plays out. So you can have very similar powers that be working in these two very different stories. What I'm trying to describe here is that by looking at your story in terms of its essential entities of power and how they play out, and remember, a handicap can also be a factor in the power struggle, an entity of power, and looking at how they play out, what advantages each have over the other, and strategize the different things that can happen that will have the story play out in certain ways. By looking at your plot in these terms, you can, if like, let's say that you're a writer of drama, and you happen to see a sci-fi film that you really like, you can ask yourself, what is it about the strategy of that story that really is compelling to me? And you could take that and reduce it to its essential parts, and then you could use that to write a drama where you have very similar power struggle going on in a whole different context. A story is not going to be more exciting if you just have conflict in the story for the sake of trying to drum up some excitement. That's going to have the opposite effect on your reader. But if you have different competing needs or motivations of characters that stir up even just a little bit of conflict, that could have a lot more effect on your reader than trying to make the bombs louder, trying to make the explosions bigger. As an exercise, instead of writing a story, this time try to write out a scenario of a powers that be scenario, and basically when you make up your characters in different bubbles, just write out their different, one of them might have the ability to turn invisible, but is very forgetful, and so there's at one point where they need to work a combination on a door and they forgot the combination, something like that. Think about the different advantages, write down in each different bubble each advantage, the different disadvantages, work that out in a bubble, the different needs, the different motivations, environmental factors that are part of it. Any factor, it really depends on the story. And go ahead and work out that power scenario and then play out. Don't describe it in terms of the characters, write it out in terms of what happens with these different power factors, how they counteract each other, how one gets the advantage over the other, and what the outcome of all of this sort of like chemistry of power factors, what are the different outcomes? And try writing it along those lines. Maybe don't even name the characters, just think about it very much in terms of the different factors in the story. One interesting way of looking at this, now there's the book of I Ching, it is the book of changes, and now in a lot of its forms it's about fortune telling and that sort of thing, but the reason I like it is that it does have a collection of these different power scenarios, and looking at it just in terms of plot creation, it reduces life to these different powers that be, the struggles and how they play out. So it's interesting to look into. It's sort of like the idea of, you have hot water, what happens when you add cold water to it? If you have a rock set up on the top of a fence, what happens when a strong wind blows? And by looking at life in terms of these essential play of power forces can help us be better at working out strategies for our stories. I have barely touched on the vast variety of different power factors. There's an infinite amount. One power factor could be that you have a character that is keeping something from another character. As an exercise, the next time you're in public and the next time you're eavesdropping on strangers having a conversation, which you, as a writer, you should do whenever you have the opportunity, in that conversation, try to look for the different power factors. One thing that can make struggles in your fiction very interesting is if you have two competing characters, if each their advantage is very different from the others. You could have one that is very strong, but another that is very fast, and it makes for it can make for very interesting strategizing to see just exactly how they leverage the situation and how each one is trying to win out but what eventually wins out of the end. And it could have a variety of outcomes depending on how you decide to have the story play out. With the tortoise and the hare, okay, if the tortoise's advantage is this tunnel vision, stubbornness, I will win the race state of mind. But if you could change the story around and you could turn that into a disadvantage. You could have the rabbit run ahead, and they tie ribbons around trees to show exactly the course of the race, and have the rabbit just go and change it to another tree so that the tortoise continues off of the race, but is so stubborn the turtle would never think, wait, maybe I made the wrong turn, would just keep on going and get lost. When people go to a sporting event, they become fully engaged in that event for the same reason that fans of fiction get fully engaged in a story. They are looking at the powers that be. They are aware of what are the different abilities and disabilities of the different team players, and it could be one is great for working with the team but is a little bit slow. This is just a lens that you put on. This is just a certain way that you look, and it provides you effective ways of strategizing, but it's also a good idea. You're not just looking at the story in this term. It's good to remove that lens and look at your story in different ways, and don't forget about working with bringing the humor and coloring your world and the other reasons why we go to the stories, the other reasons why we think stories are wonderful and we enjoy writing them. One thing I've noticed working this way is that if I'm having a problem in a story, sometimes just changing one of these power factors completely just does wonders for the story. So I have a villain character, and I want that villain character to have a certain motivation, or let's say not necessarily a motivation but a personality trait that's affecting, the personality trait could be a total not relating to people whatsoever, and I'm trying to work out what happens in the story. But if I change that one thing, well, maybe it isn't that. Maybe it's a different personality trait. What if it is that they have a tendency to look at things in real drastic ways, how everything is never just normal but is always extremely great or extremely bad? What if that's their personality trait? And all of a sudden, different scenarios, different ways that I'm still working, it's still the same story, but it all of a sudden I'm creating all these different scenarios and really telling it in a very different way. We want flexibility in our writing. We want to try out to not be stuck on the story has to go a certain way, but to try out different ways that it could play out. And for every scene that we write in our story, every scenario that we describe, have a few other possibilities of how it could go, and keep those in your mind, because those can inform the one that you finally decide to stay with. If you feel like the dialogue in your writing could be more interesting, remember, anytime that two people interact with each other, there's always some form of power struggle. I'm not, and this is as often a positive thing as it could be a negative thing. There's always some back and forth about what each one wants, the intention, the mood that each one is in, how each views the other. There's always this back and forth, and there's always a push and pull. And so whenever you're writing dialogue, keep it in mind. Work out the basic power struggle going on. And it could be just as much, it doesn't have to be a fight. It can just be the smallest of things, but it still implies that there are needs involved, there are different intentions, and they may or may not match up, they may not be mutual. but keeping this in mind can greatly inform the dialogue that you write. So you might have some writers who are really great at writing interesting dialogue, and then you have writers who are really good at writing fight scenes and not as good as writing dialogue. But by doing a lot of focus on the different power factors and strategies, then this can make you a better writer, because both of those are both about power situations and how different power factors play out. The nice thing about developing and over years improving this approach to storytelling is that you can take it to any part of the story that you're working on. Or anytime there's any kind of power struggle, it doesn't always have to be a win-lose situation. You hear people talk about it being a win-win situation, where all of a sudden both parties come out the better for having interacted with each other. Or it could be a lose-lose situation where you have the villain is destroyed, but so is the village. See, there's even a powers that be struggle going on right now. The reason I'm making this video is because I want the opportunity to tell more people about my website, my solomation.com website, where I am the story that I care so much about working on. I'm putting up there for free for viewing. I'm working on the next episode, and I'm asking you, if you like this video, if you got something from it, please, if you have time, go and check out that website, solomation.com, so you can realize these different power factors that are happening right now, the different intentions, the different motivations, and how they play out. And I hope your writing goes great. I hope your artistic creation goes well, and I hope you have a good day.